Red emergency lights cast long shadows across corroded vents. A human mechanic named Ryan Kern struggles to keep the gravity generator alive, cobbling together parts in the silence. Then he hears a small voice crying out, "Please, grandmother, wake up." But it's an Errol child trapped and desperate. What happens next will challenge everything he believes about survival on this broken station. The station breathed like an aging machine, its air thick with the scent of ozone and rust. Red emergency. Lights pulsed along access corridors, throwing long, wavering shadows that seemed to move on their own. Helios 13 hung in the void, a scarred metal crescent orbiting the gas giant Vela. Once a hub of commerce and transit, it was now a skeleton picked clean by neglect. Communications arrays stood silent. The main docking rings showed breaches no one had bothered to seal. Factions had formed among the stranded. Miners who'd lost contracts, traders with nowhere to go. Security details turned mercenary. Trust was a resource more scarce than clean water. Ryan Kern moved through it all like a ghost. He was a man built for function, not comfort. His hands were rough from years of turning wrenches and patching leaks. He wore a faded jumpsuit stained with coolant and grease. These days, his only mission was keeping the station from coming apart at the seams. That meant constant repairs, scavenging, and making do with what others threw away. Right now, he was kneeling in front of the auxiliary gravity generator, a unit held together by little more than hope and ingenuity. He'd stripped relays from abandoned labs, spliced wiring from decommissioned drones, even pulled intact coils from a wrecked shuttle. The magnetic resonator hummed weakly under his touch. It wasn't pretty, but it held. Barely. This was survival, not living. Every system on Helios 13 functioned on borrowed time. The air recyclers wheezed, the heat exchangers leaked, and always, the fear lingered, not just of systems failing, but of each other. Especially the Aral. Their green skin and amber eyes marked them, made them targets. Whispers moved through the station like currents. People said they were kidnapped for experiments, said their biology was too different, too strange. Some claimed the Aral were the reason comms went dark in the first place. Ryan had heard it all. He didn't believe most of it. But belief didn't matter. Fear did. It was in the air, like the static before a discharge. He finished securing the resonator housing, his fingers moving on memory. The work gave him purpose, a reason to ignore the tension thickening in the corridors, the way people eyed each other, the way trust had corroded like the station's outer hull. Prejudice wasn't abstract here. It was another system failure, one he couldn't fix with spare parts. He wiped his hands on his pants and listened. The station groaned around him, a sound he knew as well as his own breathing. Then, cut through the hum of machinery and distant arguments, came another sound. Small, desperate. A child's voice crying out from somewhere in the darkness. The sound started as a low scraping, then sharpened into a sob. It came from a collapsed corridor 2 levels down, a section that had been failing for weeks. Ryan's first instinct was to keep his head down and move on. That was the rule on Helios 13. You didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble found you soon enough. But the crying didn't stop. It was the sound of a child, strained with effort, thick with fear. Something in that sound hooked him. He set his wrench down quietly and started moving toward it. The corridor was a mess. A structural beam had given way, probably from metal fatigue or a power surge. Dust hung in the air, shimmering under the flickering red lights. Under the heavy Durasteel girder lay an elderly Aral woman, her breathing shallow, her eyes closed. She wasn't moving. Pinned beside her was a young girl with green skin and eyes that glowed like low-burning embers. Her small hands were raw from trying to lift the beam. She was talking softly, urgently, in a language Ryan didn't know. Then she switched to standard. "Grandmother, please, wake up, please." Ryan stood in the shadows for a moment, watching. An Aral. He'd heard the stories. Everyone had. That they were dangerous. That they couldn't be trusted. That some of them had been taken for experiments because their bodies could handle things human bodies couldn't. It was easy to believe in the dark and the whispers, but here, in the flickering half-light, he didn't see a threat. He saw a kid trying to save her family. Her amber eyes were wide, not with hostility, but with a kind of raw desperation he recognized. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror after Arkle Prime. His own distrust warred with the scene in front of him. Helping an Errol could mark him. It could make him a target. It could break the careful isolation he'd built around himself. But walking away meant leaving a child alone with a corpse. That was a choice that would stick to a man. It would live in the silence afterward. Ryan took a slow breath. The station's fears were one thing. This was another. This was real. This was now. He made his decision not with a grand gesture but with a single step forward. The girl's head snapped up. Fear flashed across her face. She shrank back, pulling closer to her grandmother. She'd been taught the same stories about humans, he realized, maybe worse ones. He kept his hands visible, his movements slow. He didn't smile. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just looked at the beam, at the trapped woman, at the girl's trembling hands. His own hands, stained with grease and marked with old scars, looked huge and rough next to hers. This wasn't about trust. It was about a problem that needed fixing. And that was something he understood. Instead of turning back, he moved closer, into the dim light where she could see him clearly. He was committed now. No going back. He stepped carefully over debris, his boots making little sound on the grated floor. The beam was heavy, reinforced durasteel, part of an old structural support. It had snapped near a stress point and fallen at an angle, pinning the old woman's legs. She wasn't moving. Her breathing was a thin, ragged sound. The girl, Ayla, he would learn her name later, looked up as his shadow fell over her. Her amber eyes were wide, bright with panic and a deep, learned fear. She'd been told humans were dangerous, that they took Oral people, that they didn't help. She flinched back, shielding her grandmother with her own small body. Ryan didn't offer a smile. He didn't make promises. He looked from the beam to the old woman, then to the girl's scraped and bloody hands. He'd seen panicked people before. He'd been one. Comforting words wouldn't lift that girder. Action would. His voice was low, flat, devoid of threat. "Move aside." She hesitated, her eyes searching his face, looking for the trap, the trick. But there was only a tired-looking man in a stained jumpsuit, his gaze fixed on the problem, not on her. Slowly, she shifted back, giving him room. Her trust was fragile, earned not by words, but by his focus on the task. He knelt, running his hands along the cold metal. His fingers found the fracture point, the uneven edge where the beam had sheared. This wasn't about brute strength. It was about leverage, physics. He'd spent years making broken systems work. This was just another system failure. He found a length of broken conduit nearby, a solid piece of pipe. He wedged it into a gap under the beam, creating a pivot point. He put his weight into it, his muscles straining against the immense load. The metal groaned in protest. In that moment, he wasn't a disgraced investigator from Arkle Prime. He was a mechanic. A fixer. His past was a closed file, a series of decisions made in rooms far from here that had cost him everything. This was simpler. A weight needed lifting. A person needed freeing. The girl watched him, her fear slowly being replaced by a desperate, focused hope. She was a survivor too. She'd already learned the station's hardest lesson. Trust no one. But now she was watching, learning a new one. That help could come from unexpected places. That a human's hands could build instead of break. He adjusted his grip, his breath coming hard. The pipe creaked but held. He put his shoulder into it, pushing with a steady, relentless pressure. The beam shifted. Just an inch. Then another. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The old woman moaned softly, her eyes fluttering open. Ayla gasped, a small choked sound of relief. Ryan held the pressure, his arms trembling. "Pull her, now!" Ayla scrambled forward, grabbing her grandmother's arms and tugging her clear of the weight. The moment she was free, Ryan eased back, letting the beam settle back into place with a heavy final thud. He dropped the pipe, his hands raw. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. The old woman was conscious, confused, her green-tinged skin pale. Ayla held her, murmuring softly. She looked up at Ryan, her expression unreadable. The fear was still there, but something else had been woven into it. A question. A possibility. The simple act of moving a beam had shifted something far heavier between them. It was a quiet start. A choice that would pull him out of the shadows and into a fight he'd tried to leave behind. He didn't lead her back into the main corridors. That would invite questions. Attention. Instead, he took her through a service hatch she hadn't noticed, hidden behind a collapsed environmental duct. The passage was tight, dark, smelling of stale air and old metal. Isla kept close, one hand on her grandmother's arm, the other brushing the wall for balance. Ryan moved with a quiet certainty, his steps sure in the near dark. He knew these tunnels like the lines on his own hands. They were his arteries through the station, his escape routes, his secret map. After several turns and a steep descent down a fixed ladder, he stopped at an unmarked bulkhead. He keyed in a code on a worn panel. The door hissed open. Beyond it lay a space that felt nothing like the decaying station outside. It was a workshop, lit by soft, steady light from repurposed strip LEDs. The air was clean, filtered. Shelves lined the walls packed with organized bins of components, wiring, circuit boards, connectors, salvaged servos. Workbenches held tools laid out with methodical precision. A small cot stood in one corner, neatly made. A portable heater hummed in another. This was his sanctuary, the one place he controlled completely. He helped the old woman to the cot. She was awake but weak, her eyes vague. Isla stood in the center of the room, her amber eyes wide, taking it all in. The order, the functionality. It was the opposite of the chaos outside. Ryan watched her. Bringing her here was a risk. This place was his life, his independence. Letting someone in, especially an Aral, broke every rule he'd made for himself. But leaving her out there was a death sentence. He'd made his choice back at that beam. He picked up a hydro spanner, turning it over in his hand. "You can stay here," he said, his voice flat. No sentiment, just fact. It's safe. For now. He gestured around the room. "I'll show you how to keep the systems running. How to fix what breaks." He paused, looking at her directly. "In return, you help me. You do what I say. You learn." It was a transaction, a deal for survival. But it was more than that. He was offering her a skill, a way to be more than a victim, to be useful, to have agency in a place that gave her none. He was reframing her, not as a burden, not as a refugee, but as an asset, a partner in the daily fight against entropy. Ayla looked from his face to the organized shelves, to the tools, to her grandmother resting on the cot. Her fear was still there, a tightness around her eyes. But beneath it, something else stirred. Curiosity. A fierce, burning need to understand the machines that ruled their lives, to not be powerless. She nodded, a single sharp movement. "I want to learn to fix things too," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. There was no pleading in it. It was a statement of intent. The dynamic shifted in that moment. The bond was no longer just rescuer and rescued. It was mentor and apprentice. It was a shared project. Survival, yes, but also rebuilding. He handed her the hydrospanner. It was too big for her hand, but she took it, her fingers closing around the grip. It was a beginning. A quiet pact made in a hidden room far from the station's hungry eyes. The real work was about to start. He led her through maintenance tunnels most people didn't know existed. Access hatches opened into narrow, unlit passages that ran behind the station's main corridors. These were the veins of Helios 13, forgotten and poorly mapped. Ryan moved with certainty. He knew every turn, every loose panel, every air current. Isla followed, her steps quiet. She didn't ask where they were going. She just watched his back, her amber eyes taking in everything. The workshop wasn't on any schematic. It was a forgotten maintenance bay sealed off after a minor hull breach years ago. Ryan had found it, repaired the outer door, and claimed it. He keyed in a code on a concealed panel. The door hissed open. Inside was a space lit by portable work lamps. Tools hung neatly on magnetic strips. Scavenged parts filled shelves, circuit boards, relay coils, lengths of wiring, power cells of various charge levels. A small cot stood in one corner. A water reclaimer hummed softly near the air scrubber. This was more than a hiding place. It was a fortress of self-sufficiency. He turned to her. Her grandmother was resting on the cot, still unconscious but stable. "You can stay here," he said. His voice was flat, offering a transaction, not charity. "It's secure. Air's clean. But it's not free." He gestured to the tools, the parts, the half-finished projects. I'll teach you what I know. How to keep this station from falling apart. In return, you're my assistant. You do what I say. You learn. You work. She looked around the workshop. Her gaze wasn't fearful now. It was calculating. She saw the order in the chaos, the purpose in the clutter. She was a refugee, an aerial child alone on a hostile station. This was more than shelter. It was a chance. I want to learn to fix things too, she said. Her voice was small but clear. There was no plea in it, just a statement of fact. A deal accepted, he nodded once. The utilitarian rescue was over. A partnership had begun. It was fragile, built on need, not trust. But it was a start. He handed her a basic diagnostic scanner. First lesson, power distribution. He pointed to a tangle of color-coded wiring on a central workbench. The station's falling apart because people break things and don't fix them. They don't care. We have to care. Every lesson carried risk. The hum of a soldering iron, the glow of a welding torch, the chime of a diagnostic. Any sound could attract attention. Patrols from Camaro's security force roamed the decks. They didn't like people who knew how things worked. People who fixed things were a threat to the chaos they profited from. Ryan kept one ear tuned to the comms scanner, listening for patrol chatter. He showed Ayla how to reroute power, patch life support leaks, recalibrate failing sensors. She learned fast. Her hands, once bloodied from trying to lift a beam, now handled delicate components with a surprising steadiness. Her resilience mirrored his own. He saw in her the same driven focus he'd buried after Arkle Prime, the need to mend to make whole. She didn't just follow instructions. She adapted. A broken conduit coupler became a new hinge for a door. A spent power cell's casing was repurposed into a protective shield for a delicate circuit. She worked with what was there, not what she wished was there. A shared ethic formed in that cluttered space, silent but understood. They would fix what fear and prejudice had shattered. The work was a language they both spoke. But questions lingered in the quiet moments. Ayla watched him as he repaired a damaged servo motor. "Why do you live down here?" she asked. "Alone?" Her voice was curious, not accusing. The question hung in the air between the hum of machines. It was the first time she'd asked about his past. He didn't answer right away. He kept working, his focus on the delicate wiring. But the question had been asked. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer just about survival. It was about the reasons behind it. The workshop had become a crucible. They were no longer just hiding. They were preparing. The first tentative plans for something more began to form in the space between soldered connections and salvaged parts. They were repairing an old power relay when she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the steady hum of the workshop's environmental systems. "People talk about you," Ayla said. She didn't look up from the circuit board she was cleaning. "They say you were someone. Before here. They say you did something bad." Ryan's hands stilled on the relay casing. He'd known the question would come. The station thrived on whispers. His name was one of them. He looked at her. This small, green-skinned girl who had already learned that survival meant understanding the dangers around you. He owed her a version of the truth. Not the whole thing. The whole thing was too heavy for a child. But enough. "It was a place called Arkle Prime," he said, his voice low. He wiped grease from his fingers with a clean rag. The motion was slow, deliberate. A terraforming project, big one, meant to make a dead rock livable. He didn't look at her. He looked at his hands, at the tools on the bench, at anything but the memory. They cut corners, used cheap reactor shielding to save creds. I was an engineer, an investigator. I found the flaws. I said it wouldn't hold. He paused. The silence in the workshop felt different now, thicker. They said I was wrong, said I was causing panic. Then the core breached. He didn't describe the aftermath, the radiation bloom, the evacuation chaos, the lives lost. He didn't need to. The grim set of his jaw said it all. The company needed a scapegoat, someone to blame instead of their own greed. They had the creds, the lawyers, the influence. I had a report nobody wanted to read. He finally looked at her. His eyes were hard, but the hardness was directed inward. They branded me a traitor, said my negligence caused the disaster. My career ended. My name meant nothing after that. Just a story to warn others. The implications settled in the space between them. The frontier was a hard place. It rewarded those who kept their heads down. who fixed what was broken without asking why it broke. It punished those who asked too many questions, who challenged the flow of power and creds. A corrupt system protected itself. It always did. He saw her processing it. Her amber eyes were thoughtful, seeing the shape of the story even without all the details. Her own life was a smaller, quieter version of the same pattern. Taken because she was different. Used because she was convenient. Blamed for existing. Her desire to fix her own body, to build a new leg from scraps, was its own kind of rebellion. It echoed the conviction he'd buried deep after Arkle Prime. The belief that things could be better if someone just had the courage to make them right. That someone had to care. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed that feeling until he saw it in her. It was a dangerous feeling. It got people killed, but it was also the only thing that ever changed anything. They were quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the gentle hiss of the air scrubber. The shared understanding was a new layer to their partnership. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about recognition. They were both casualties of the same cold, efficient machine, a system that valued profit over people, power over principles. He had been broken by it. She had been discarded by it. But here, in this hidden room, they were putting themselves back together. Not as the people the system said they were, but as something new, something it hadn't counted on. The ghost of Arkle Prime was in the room with them now, a silent third party to their work. It was no longer just his past. It was their present. A shared enemy had been named, not in words, but in a quiet, mutual understanding of how the world truly worked. The unexplored sections of the station were a maze of sealed doors and dark corridors. Ryan needed a specific type of high-capacity capacitor, the kind only found in old medbay equipment. He knew a sector that had been quarantined after a chemical leak. Most people avoided it. The air there still carried a faint metallic tang. He moved carefully, Ayla a silent shadow behind him. They found a lab that wasn't on any current station map. The door was sealed with a heavy-duty lock, but the panel was old. Ryan bypassed it with a homemade decoder he kept on his belt. The door slid open with a tired groan. Inside, the lab was cold. Preservation units hummed softly along one wall. The workbenches were clean, too clean as if someone had recently wiped them down. But the data terminals were still active, screens dark but emitting a low-power signature. Ryan touched a key. A screen flickered to life. Schematics filled the display, not human anatomy. The nervous system diagrams were all wrong. The synaptic pathways, the neural relays, they were designed for a non-human sentient species. Errol. The diagrams were labeled with project codes and confidentiality stamps. This wasn't medical research. It was something else. A soft whirring sound came from the corridor outside. Ryan's head snapped up. He knew that sound. Security drone. The kind Camaro's people used for patrols in sensitive areas. He motioned for Ayla to get behind a storage locker. He drew his industrial plasma cutter, not a weapon, but it could burn through metal. It would have to do. The drone glided into the doorway, its single red optic scanning the room. It didn't issue a warning. It simply raised its front-mounted stun emitter. Ryan fired first. The plasma arc hit the drone's chassis, melting through its outer shell. It sparked violently, spun in a clumsy circle, and crashed into a wall, its systems frying. The silence that followed was heavy. That drone wasn't there for routine patrol. It was guarding this place. The station's decay was a cover story. Behind the failing systems and the crumbling corridors was a different kind of operation. A profitable one. They weren't just losing power and air. They were losing people. Children. The lab wasn't studying how to help the Aral, it was studying how to use them. Their unique biology wasn't a curiosity. It was a commodity. The pieces clicked into place for Ryan with a cold, sickening clarity. The whispers, the fear, the experiments, it was all real. It was a business. Ayla stepped out from behind the locker. She was looking at the schematics on the screen, her green face pale. She understood enough. Her voice was very small. "Is that why humans took me after the explosion? For experiments?" The question hung in the chilled air. It wasn't an accusation. It was a confirmation. The vague dread she'd carried, the stories she'd heard, all crystallized into a single horrific fact. The same fear that had made her shrink away from Ryan that first day. The same prejudice that made humans distrust Aral. It was all being harvested. Weaponized. It was a system that turned fear into a resource. that used distrust to hide its crimes in plain sight. Her value wasn't as a person, it was as a test subject. Ryan looked from her frightened face to the smoldering drone. His plan had been simple: survive, keep the lights on, maybe find a way off this rock. That plan was gone. He couldn't just escape this. He couldn't just hide her. Hiding wasn't enough anymore. The resolve that settled over him was colder and harder than any metal on the station. He would protect her, not by running, but by making sure nothing like this could ever touch her again. He would break the machine that saw her as something to be taken apart and studied. The mechanic was done fixing broken systems. It was time to dismantle the source of the breakage itself. The idea wasn't born from ambition. It came from watching her try to stand on a makeshift crutch he'd welded from scrap. Her leg had been crushed in the same blast that killed her parents. The station clinic had offered a basic prosthetic, a clumsy, rigid piece of plastic that didn't fit and didn't work with her alien nervous system. She'd refused to wear it. It was a reminder of what she'd lost, not a path forward. Ryan watched her struggle and saw not a disability but an engineering problem, a system that needed fixing. He knew the station's medical labs held the components, advanced neural interfaces, biocompatible actuators. They were locked away, forbidden for civilian use, especially for an oral. Building a functional prosthetic wasn't just a project. It was an act of defiance. Getting caught meant a one-way trip to Camaro's detention block. Or worse, the raid was a study in calculated risk. They moved at the changing of the guard shift, using a maintenance crawl space that ran behind the secure medlab wall. Ryan cut a small, precise hole in the paneling with a thermal blade. The smell of melted polymer filled the tight space. Isla kept watch, her good ear tuned to the corridor, her body tense. Inside, the lab was dark and cold. Storage units hummed. Ryan's fingers moved quickly, selecting components. A high-density power cell, a bundle of microfilament wiring, a sealed case labeled neurosynaptic coupler, class 4 or. Each item stolen was a death sentence if discovered. They took only what they needed. Nothing more. They retreated the way they came, sealing the hole behind them. The whole operation took less than 6 minutes. Back in the workshop, the parts looked small and insignificant on the workbench. The danger was in what they represented. Their hideout, once just a shelter, transformed into a development lab. Ryan cleared the central work table. Schematics were drawn on scraps of recycled plastifilm. Tools were laid out with surgical precision. He worked with a focus Ayla had never seen before. This wasn't patching a leak or rerouting power. This was building something entirely new. He explained it to her as he worked, his voice a low monotone. The principles of neural feedback. The way the prosthetic would need to interpret signals from her residual nerves and translate them into motion. It was a bridge between her biology and his machinery. She listened, her amber eyes fixed on his hands, absorbing every detail. She wasn't just a patient. She was part of the team. The prototype was a rough assembly of stolen and scavenged parts. Wires snaked from a central housing. The joint mechanisms were exposed. It was held together by precision welds and hope. Ryan held it up. It looked nothing like the sleek medical models in the catalogs. "It's not pretty," he said, his voice flat. "But it's functional." He handed it to her. Her hands were steady as she took it. She fitted the interface cup to her residual limb. It clicked into place with a soft hiss of sealing pressure. The power cell hummed to life. A soft blue light glowed along a seam. She was very still, her eyes wide. Then she took a breath. A small, sharp intake of air. "I can feel it," she whispered. Her voice was full of something like awe. "Like my leg is there again." The feeling didn't last. A spasm of pain shot through her a moment later. She gasped, her face contorting. It was a phantom pain, a misfire from nerves that remembered a limb that was gone. The raw signal was too much. The prosthetic interpreted it as a command to lock up. The joint seized. Ryan was at her side in an instant, his tools already in hand. He gently detached the unit, his fingers moving to adjust the dampeners on the control nexus. The victory was real, but it was incomplete. The connection was there, but it was raw, untamed. Healing wasn't a switch to be flipped. It was a process. It would require recalibration, patience, a careful, compassionate form of engineering that listened to the body it was trying to help. The work was just beginning. The stolen data chips weren't just about medical tech. Ryan ran decryption algorithms for 2 days straight. The workshop lit by the relentless glow of the main terminal. The decoded files painted a picture far darker than a few backroom experiments. It was a system, a station-wide black market operation, sleek and efficient. At its heart were the mandatory health screenings. Every resident, especially all children, had to report for monthly checkups. The files showed how these screenings were the point of entry. Biometric data was collected, but not for health records. It was for selection. Specific genetic markers, neural conductivity levels, cellular regeneration rates, all were logged and scored. Children who scored high on viability metrics were flagged. Then they were siphoned out. The name Dr. Lena Voss appeared again and again, the station's chief medical officer. Her signature authorized the transfer orders. Her voice was on audio logs discussing shipment viability and neurological yield. She wasn't just complicit. She was running the program. Ryan cross-referenced the data with other logs. Patrol schedules showed increased drone activity around the medical sector during specific time windows. Cargo manifests listed shipments of agricultural samples and industrial reagents that departed on regular shuttles to off-station corporate affiliates. The weights and volumes matched the requirements for cryostasis pods. The pieces fit together with a chilling precision. The medical wing itself was a facade. Behind the clean white halls and the friendly nurses were hidden clinics. Access required key codes that changed daily. The rooms there weren't for healing. They were for extraction. The children selected from the screenings were brought in for further tests. They never came back. Their families were told there had been complications, infections, pre-existing conditions. The grief was just collateral damage in a very profitable business. The truth was cold and simple. They were assets. Their unique biology was harvested, packaged, and sold. Ryan showed Ayla the compiled evidence. She sat very still, her green skin looking pale under the workshop lights. She wasn't just looking at files. She was looking at her own fate. The explosion that killed her parents, her injury. It had made her imperfect for their purposes. Damaged goods. That was the only reason she'd been left behind. She understood the scale of it now. This wasn't a few kids going missing. It was an assembly line, a cold, calculated process that treated living beings like spare parts. The weight of it settled over the workshop. The risk was astronomical. Camaro's security force was everywhere. Voss had the full authority of the medical bay. They had a hidden room and a handful of tools. Going public meant painting a target on their backs that would never come off. They would be hunted. Silence was the safer choice. The smart choice. Ryan looked at Ayla. Her small hands were clenched into fists on the workbench. Her amber eyes were hard. She had lost everything to this machine. He had lost his name, his future. Running wasn't an option anymore. Hiding wasn't enough. We have to tell everyone, Ayla said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. We have to show them, Ryan nodded. It was a suicide mission, but some truths were worth that price. Their fragile alliance, built on salvaged parts and shared silence, solidified into something else, a pact, a vow. They were no longer just a mechanic and his apprentice hiding from the world. They were going to declare war on it. The goal was no longer personal survival. It was exposure. They would rip the truth out into the open light and let the station see what had been done in its name. The cost didn't matter. The odds didn't matter. They finally understood what they had to do. The door to the workshop hissed open without warning. No key code chime. No sound of approach. Ryan's hand went to his plasma cutter. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the corridor's dim glow. It was Commander Maris. Her uniform was the same as Camaro's security force, but it was unbuttoned at the collar. Her expression was grim, her eyes scanning the room quickly, taking in the workbench, the stolen components, Ayla's tense form. She didn't draw a weapon. She held up a single data chip, her movements slow and deliberate. "I know what you found," she said. Her voice was low, measured. "I've been inside Camaro's operation for 5 months. Galactic Center sent me, undercover." She let the words hang in the air. Her allegiance was a coin spinning in midair. It could land on either side. This could be a trap, a clever way to flush them out, to get them to confess everything. Or it could be the only chance they had. Ryan didn't move. He kept his body between Mary's and Ayla. His mind raced through the possibilities. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. A mistake now would get them all killed. "Prove it," he said. His voice was flat. "A challenge," Miras nodded once. She slid the data chip into a port on the workbench terminal. Files cascaded across the screen. Not just schematics. Not just lists. These were recordings. Audio logs of Camaro discussing shipment quotas with off-station buyers. Video of covert transfers in Docking Bay 4. Financial transactions routed through shell corporations. Dr. Voss's detailed reports on neurological viability of specific children. It was a complete audit of the entire operation. Names, dates, times, credit amounts. It was more than they had. It was validation. Concrete, irrefutable evidence. The accusations weren't just theories whispered in a hidden room. They were facts, documented by one of Camaro's own commanders. Miris watched them process it. "You thought you were alone," she said. "You're not. This is bigger than Helios 13. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to recruit you." She reframed the board. They were no longer two fugitives hiding from a powerful enemy. They were assets. Participants in a larger, calculated rebellion. Their hidden workshop wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a command post. The dynamic in the room shifted. The tension didn't leave, but its nature changed. It was no longer about fear of capture. It was about the weight of the next move. 3 people against a fortified, well-armed corruption. The plan had to be perfect. Mary's laid it out. It was a 2-part assault, cyber and physical. Ryan would handle the intrusion. He knew the station's systems better than anyone. His backdoor access into the administrative hub was their key. He would slice into the core, plant the evidence, and seize control of the station-wide broadcast array. Miris would provide the muscle. She knew the patrol routes, the shift changes, the weak points in Camaro's security. She would create the diversion, draw forces away from the control center. Isla had a role too. She was small, fast, and knew the maintenance tunnels better than any security drone. She would be the runner, the physical carrier for a data disruptor that would jam local comms, creating chaos at a critical moment. The resolution was clear, the objective stark. They would not just leak the data. They would blast it to every screen, every comm, every public terminal on Helios 13. They would use the station's own infrastructure as a megaphone. The truth would not be a whisper. It would be a shockwave. They had the evidence. They had the access. They had a plan. The next phase was execution. The broadcast would be their weapon, and the entire station would hear it. The administrative hub's access tunnel was tight and unlit, humming with the vibration of distant machinery. Ryan led the way, his movements economical. Miris followed, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. Isla came last, a compact data disruptor clutched against her chest. The air stank of overheated electronics and stale coolant. The plan was a clockwork of split-second timing. A drone patrol glided past the tunnel's ventilation grate, its red optics scanning the empty corridor beyond. They waited until its hum faded. Then Ryan moved, using a bypass chip on the service hatch. The lock disengaged with a soft click. He pulled the hatch open. The control center lay beyond. Camaro was waiting for them. He stood in the center of the room, flanked by 2 armed guards. He wasn't surprised. He'd expected them. A slow smile spread across his face. The trap was sprung. "The mechanic and the runaway," he said. His voice was smooth, condescending. "And a traitorous commander. I thought you'd try something like this." The tension in the room was a live wire. Miris didn't hesitate. She drew her weapon in one fluid motion, her aim steady on Camaro. "It's over," she said. Her voice was cold steel. "The station hears the truth today." The confrontation erupted. Camaro's guards raised their rifles. Ryan shoved Ayla back toward the open hatch. "Go now!" he barked. She didn't need to be told twice. She turned and sprinted back into the tunnel. The disruptor held tight. Ryan moved to a secondary console, his hands flying across the interface. He wasn't a fighter. He was support. He brought up a station schematic, his focus absolute. He could see the security teams converging on their position. He sent a lockdown command to the corridor blast doors ahead of them, sealing 3 guards in a side passage. He rerouted power from the main lights, plunging a section of the hub into darkness. He created chaos. Bought seconds, Miris used the confusion. She fired a controlled burst that took the first guard in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second guard ducked behind a console, returning fire. Camaro drew a compact energy pistol, his smug facade cracking into rage. He fired at Ryan's console. Sparks erupted. Ryan flinched back but kept working, his fingers finding the primary broadcast console. He initiated the data upload. Miris advanced, using console banks for cover. She feinted left, then surged right, closing the distance to the second guard. She disarmed him with a sharp blow to the wrist, then jabbed the butt of her pistol into his temple. He dropped. Camaro was alone. He aimed at Miris. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. Miris was faster. She didn't shoot to kill. She shot his weapon from his hand. It clattered across the floor. She was on him before he could react, twisting his arm behind his back and forcing him to his knees. She secured his wrists with plasticuffs from her belt. His struggle was useless against her trained efficiency. The fight was over in less than a minute. On the main view screen, a progress bar filled. Ryan's stolen evidence began flooding the station's network. Every public screen, every personal comm, every terminal in every corridor flickered to life. The damning files, the recordings, the financial trails, all of it spilled out into the open. Ryan watched the final confirmation flash on his screen. His voice was flat, drained. Complete. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of a closed room or a hidden secret. It was the silence of a station holding its breath. Then the noise began. Not from the control center, but from outside. Muffled shouts from the corridors. The confused chatter of comms traffic. The truth had landed. It was everywhere. Camaro's operation, built on secrets and fear, collapsed in that instant. Its foundation was gone. The weight of what he'd done was now public property. The station wasn't silent anymore. It was listening. It was hearing everything. Camaro died in a detention cell. The official report listed it as a cerebral embolism, but people on the station knew the truth. The weight of his exposed crimes crushed him. The evidence Miris and Ryan had broadcast was too vast, too detailed to deny. It looped on every screen for 72 hours. There was no coming back from that. Galactic Center sent an oversight committee within the week. They weren't there to investigate. They were there to clean house. The old governance structure was dissolved. Every department head, every security officer, every administrator was reviewed. Those complicit were removed. Those who turned a blind eye were retrained or reassigned. The station's security force was stripped down to a skeleton crew, then rebuilt with new personnel vetted by Miris herself. Accountability was no longer a suggestion. It was the only standard that mattered. Miris was offered command. She took it. Her first act was to declassify the station's operational logs. Budgets, patrol routes, maintenance schedules, all of it became public record. Governance shifted from closed-door meetings to transparent councils held in the main concourse. Anyone could attend. Anyone could speak. The pervasive fear that had been the station's true atmosphere began to dissipate. It was replaced by a cautious, weary trust. The work was slow. Rebuilding the physical infrastructure was one thing. The structural corrosion was extensive. Teams worked around the clock to replace corroded vents, patch hull breaches, and bring the primary life support systems back to full capacity. But rebuilding the social trust was harder. It happened in small moments. A human sharing tools with an aerial technician, a security officer helping to carry supplies instead of demanding a bribe. The station was learning how to function as a community, not just a collection of suspicious factions. One standard year later, a data packet arrived from Galactic Central Command. It was an official communique for Ryan Kern, a full and unconditional exoneration. All charges related to the Arkle Prime incident were expunged from his record. The company that had scapegoated him was itself under investigation for gross negligence and corruption. The message was dry, bureaucratic. It didn't apologize. It just stated facts. But for Ryan, it was a weight he hadn't realized he was still carrying. It settled something deep inside him that had been off balance for years. He was offered a role he didn't expect. Chief Technical Instructor at the newly formed Helios Research Academy. He accepted. His classroom was a bright, clean space that had once been a storage bay. The students were a mix of species, human, Aural, others. He taught them the same principles he'd taught Ayla. How to fix what was broken. How to build with what you have. How to see a problem and find a solution. His first official act was to inaugurate the Cross-Species Prosthetic Initiative. It was built on the rough prototype he'd made in a hidden workshop. The program wasn't about building better limbs. It was about building bridges. The technology was designed for seamless integration across physiological divides. It was open to anyone who needed it, regardless of origin or ability to pay. The station's transformation was complete. The culture of secrecy and exploitation was gone. In its place was a fragile but growing transparency. Systems were maintained. Power flowed steadily. The air was clean. The repair of trust was a slower process, a careful calibration of actions and words, but it was underway. The real work, the deep work of healing, could finally begin. The playing field was a wide stretch of polished deck, plating under the bright, steady glow of the station's new lighting. Isla stood at the edge, her body poised. Her prosthetic leg caught the light, a sleek assembly of brushed metal and composite materials. It wasn't the clumsy plastic the clinic had offered. It was a part of her now. The game was a simple one, a mix of low-gravity handball and tag the older kids had made up. A ball made of wrapped polymers bounced between teams. For a second, she didn't move. The memory was sharp, a physical thing. Herself smaller, hunched against a corridor wall. A human boy offering a ball, her own voice small and ashamed. "Sorry, human. I can't play ball." The words had been a shield, a way to hide the hurt, the feeling of being broken. She had believed them then. That girl felt like a stranger now. The whistle blew. She pushed off, her new leg responding with a smooth, powerful thrust. The motion was fluid, natural. The neural interface translated her intent into action with near-perfect synchronicity. She wasn't just moving. She was running. The feeling was a rush of pure, uncomplicated joy. The wind against her face, the thud of her feet on the deck, the laugh that broke from her chest. It was a feeling she thought she'd lost forever. The ball flew toward her. She pivoted, her footwork sure and stable. She caught it, spun, and sent it arcing toward the goal. It sailed through the hoop. A cheer went up from her teammates. Humans, Errol, a couple of traitors from the Cygnus system. They clapped her on the back, their faces split with genuine grins. She was surrounded not by suspicion but by a community. They saw her skill, not her leg. They saw a player, not a victim. This moment was the story's entire arc, played out in a simple game. It was the journey from isolation to capability, from being defined by what was taken to being empowered by what was built. The technology was the bridge. The prosthetic was a marvel of engineering, a testament to what could be achieved when knowledge was applied with empathy instead of greed. It allowed her body to do what her spirit had always wanted. But the device alone wasn't the magic. It was just a tool. The real healing happened in the workshop. It was in Ryan's patient explanations, his steady hands guiding hers. It was in the long hours of trial and error, the shared frustration and the shared triumph when a connection finally clicked into place. It was in the trust she had to place in him, a human to help her rebuild a part of herself. And it was in the collective commitment of a station that had decided to be better. The new academy, the open clinics, the safe playing field, these were all choices. Choices to invest in people, not profit. Choices to build instead of break. Healing was never a solo project. It couldn't be accomplished with a medical device handed over in a sterile room. It demanded a network. It required a mentor who saw potential in the damage. It needed a community willing to make space for someone different. It asked for a collective decision to value repair over ruin. The prosthetic leg let her run. But the trust, the mentorship, the shared commitment of the people around her, that was what let her belong. She stood there for a moment, catching her breath, the sounds of the game swirling around her. She looked across the field, past the laughing players toward the large observation windows that showed the star-dusted blackness of space. Her future was no longer a thing to be feared or hidden from. It was a wide-open field, waiting. She felt a smile spread across her face, real and unstoppable. Hope wasn't an abstract idea. It was the feeling of solid ground under both feet, and the knowledge that she could run toward whatever came next. Ryan watched from the workshop window. The new observation pane was clean, free of the grime and scratches that had clouded the old ones. Below, on the academy's playing field, Ayla moved with a fluid grace that still seemed impossible. Her laughter carried on the recycled air, a sound he'd once only heard in moments of rare, hard-won triumph inside these walls. His hands resting on the sill were clean for once. No grease, no coolant stains, just the calluses that years of work had earned him. His old insistence that he could fix things echoed in his mind. It had been a defense back then, a mantra for a man who could only trust machines because they didn't lie, didn't betray. Now it meant something else entirely. The scope of the repair had changed. The mechanic who had survived through solitude now led a team of 30. His classroom was full. His workshop was no longer a hidden refuge but the heart of the Academy's technical wing. The restoration he guided wasn't just for broken generators or leaking pipes. It was for people. His mission, the Cross-Species Prosthetic Initiative, had a simple, radical core principle. Access was not determined by origin. It wasn't about species or corporate affiliation or creds. If you needed a limb, an organ assist, a neural interface, the technology was available. The design specs were open source. The fabrication labs were open to the public. He had taken the rough, functional prototype built from stolen parts and fear, and he had turned it into a system. A system meant for everyone. He saw a student across the lab, a young man from one of the mining colonies, fitting a newly printed prosthetic hand onto a woman whose arm had been crushed in a cargo incident. They were working together, speaking in low, focused tones. The woman's species didn't matter. The student's origin didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the connection being made, the function being restored. Ryan didn't interfere. He just watched. This was the work now. He had built the framework, provided the tools, established the ethic. But the actual healing, the real repair, was done by others. It was a humbling thing to witness. A cheer erupted from the field. Isla had scored again. She spun, her face alight with a joy that was entirely her own. He had given her a tool, a key. She had done the rest herself. She had chosen to run. She had chosen to play. She had chosen to trust a group of kids who saw her as a friend, not a specimen. His role had been the initial risky act, the decision to step toward a cry in the dark instead of away from it. That single choice had been the catalyst, but the resulting change belonged to her, to them. This pulled the entire story out of the realm of a simple rescue. It wasn't about one mechanic saving one girl. It was about how that act could seed an inclusive future. It was a blueprint. The repaired world, he understood now, didn't arrive in a single glorious moment. It began with these small, quiet acts of courage, a decision to help when it was easier not to, a choice to trust when history said you shouldn't, a commitment to build something for a stranger you would never meet. True heroism wasn't about grand speeches or dramatic battles. It started in the expected fear, in the moments everyone else walked away. It was the simple, terrifying decision to be kind, to be useful. He took a slow breath. The station's air no longer tasted of metal and decay. It was clean, fresh. The steady hum of the magnetic resonator was a constant, reassuring vibration through the deck plates. Everything was functioning as it should. The station, once a dying husk, was finally breathing easy. It was a new kind of silence. Not the silence of abandonment, but the quiet of a machine in perfect, steady operation. The magnetic resonator hummed a low, steady tone. It was a sound Ryan Kern had spent years fighting for. Now it was just background noise. The station's core systems ran with a smoothness that felt almost foreign. The constant battle against failure was over. Maintenance teams, a mix of humans and Aral, worked regular shifts now. They replaced parts before they broke. They had the supplies. The scarcity that had defined life on Helios 13 was a memory. The red emergency lights that had pulsed for years were gone. In their place, a calm white glow lit every corridor. It was a simple change, but it meant everything. It meant stability. It meant no one was waiting for the next crisis. Corroded ventilation shafts were being cut out and replaced section by section. The work was slow, methodical. Teams moved through the station's arteries, welding new alloy panels into place. The air lost its old metallic taste. It was cleaner, fresher. You could breathe deep without thinking about it. This physical repair mirrored a deeper change. The social order was mending itself. It happened through a new, relentless accountability. Meeting logs were public. Resource allocations were posted on every comms board. Security patrols filed reports anyone could access. Trust wasn't given freely. It was earned through transparent action day after day. The pervasive fear that had been the station's true currency was slowly going out of circulation. Ryan's hidden workshop was gone. Its reinforced door stood open now, integrated into the main academy laboratory. The space was brighter, filled with newer equipment, but the ethos remained. It was still a place for fixing things. Students moved between workbenches, their conversations focused on solutions, not suspicions. Isla was a constant presence there. She assisted Ryan with the more complex prosthetic calibrations. Her understanding of the neural interfaces now expert level. In between, she attended classes on xenobiology and engineering. Her education was her own. She was building a future, not just surviving the present. They still worked together often. Their project was no longer a single leg or a hidden broadcast. It was the slow, patient work of repairing a community. They were fixing what fear and prejudice had shattered for years. The frontier outpost known for its lawlessness and decay was changing its name. Word was getting out to other stations. Ships arriving at Helios 13 found a functioning dock, a helpful security force, and a place where deals were made in the open. It was becoming a beacon, a place that proved things could be different. That order could emerge from chaos if people chose to build it. The renewal was not a single event. It was a process. It was in the smell of fresh polymer from a newly printed part. It was in the sound of a class of mixed-species children laughing in the rec area. It was in the steady, reliable vibration of the deck plates underfoot. The station was no longer decaying. It was growing. It was healing. It was a living thing again, its systems and its people finally working in sync. The hard, brittle edge of life on the frontier had softened, replaced by a resilient, durable hope. The story of Helios 13 didn't stay contained. It traveled on supply ships and passenger freighters, moving through the trade lanes like a current. Ryan's prosthetic program expanded. The open-source schematics and fabrication protocols were downloaded on stations from the Cygnus Belt to the Outer Rim. The need was universal. People who had lost limbs in mining accidents, industrial mishaps, or simple bad luck now had an option beyond corporate price gouging or painful, ill-fitting basics. The technology was species-agnostic. It was designed for function, not profit. A human prosthetic arm could be recalibrated for a Tarkonian's physiology. A joint actuator for an aerial leg could be modified for a human knee. The design philosophy was simple. If it could be measured, it could be built. The old prejudices didn't vanish. On distant outposts, far from the reformed governance of Helios, suspicion still ran deep. Rumors persisted. Some station bosses called the new tech a trick, a way to implant trackers, a scheme to weaken other species. Fear was a hardy weed. It took root in neglected places. But the blueprint for change existed now. It was a tangible thing, a data file, a set of instructions, a physical device that worked. You could hold it in your hand. You could see it function. That evidence was harder to argue against than a promise. Ayla became a living example of that evidence. Her journey was a story told in cargo holds and crew lounges. The girl who couldn't play ball. The victim of a system that saw her as an experiment. The student who learned to build her own future. She was proof of what became possible when technology was guided by empathy, not exploitation. She wasn't a symbol crafted by a public relations team. She was real. She had the scars. She had the leg. And she had the confidence that came from mastering the very machines that had once been used to control her. Her transition from a hidden, frightened child to a public student and technician gave people a narrative they could believe in. It was a specific story of overcoming, not a vague ideal. The prosthetic leg itself, in its various forms, became more than a medical device. It morphed into a symbol. It stood for the possibility of repair. It represented the idea that a broken thing didn't have to stay broken. That loss didn't have to be permanent. On stations where resources were scarce and life was hard, that symbol carried weight. It was a quiet argument against despair. It suggested that a community could choose to invest in its own people, even when it was difficult. Even when old hatreds whispered against it, this shifted the entire concept of healing. It was no longer an individual's private struggle, a burden to be borne alone in a medic's office or a hidden room. It became a collective commitment. A community that adopted the technology was making a statement. It was choosing to allocate power, materials, and expertise to the project of putting each other back together. It was a practical form of solidarity. The act of fabricating a limb for a neighbor became as important as patching a hull breach. Both were acts of preservation. Both were investments in a shared future, from the destruction of Arkle Prime, from the corruption of Camaro's regime, from the personal wreckage of Ryan's career and Ayla's childhood, came a durable form of renewal. It wasn't a flashy victory. It was a slow, steady process of rebuilding trust through action. It was a new standard, A proof of concept that a frontier station didn't have to be a lawless, decaying place. It could be a hub, a place of second chances and new beginnings. The story of Helios 13 was no longer about an ending. It was about a model, a working prototype for a better way to survive out here. The next chapter was already starting on a dozen other stations in a dozen other workshops, where someone was downloading a schematic and looking at a broken system, wondering if they could fix it too. Ryan stood at the academy window, watching the white lights glow steady along the concourse. The memory surfaced without warning. Not the broadcast, not the fight with Camaro. Something smaller. The moment he first heard the sound. A child's cry, thin and desperate, cutting through the station's constant mechanical groan. He had been elbows deep in the gravity generator, his world reduced to circuits and survival. That sound was an interruption. An inconvenience, a risk. His path then was clear, simple. Keep the systems running. Stay alone, stay safe. That was the contract he had with the universe after Arkle Prime. Do your job. Don't get involved. Don't care, he could have continued. He could have tightened the last bolt, closed the panel, and walked the other way. That was the expected choice. The smart one. Everyone on Helios 13 knew the rules. You didn't get involved. You didn't stick your neck out for strangers, especially not Errol strangers. The stories were too thick, the fear too real. His own distrust was a heavy weight. It would have been easy to let it anchor him in place, to rationalize it, to tell himself it was a trick, a trap, not his problem. He had perfected the art of solitary survival. It was a bleak kind of safety, but it was predictable. Instead, he made a different calculation. It wasn't grand or heroic. It was a quiet internal shift. A decision to prioritize the immediate, tangible need over a vague, inherited fear. He chose a single act of compassion over years of ingrained prejudice. He set down his wrench. He moved toward the sound, not as a hero, but as a mechanic, a problem solver. The two words he spoke, move aside, weren't offered as kindness. They were an instruction, a practical response to a mechanical problem. A beam needed lifting, a person needed freeing, but that simple utilitarian act was the first thread. It began weaving an alliance built not on trust but on shared necessity. That single thread pulled others. It drew in Ayla's determination, her intelligence, her own will to survive. It drew in the hidden workshop, the stolen parts, the shared mission. That small alliance became a lens, focusing on a corruption so vast it had become the station's atmosphere. They exposed the trafficking. They revealed the lies. They forced a reckoning that reformed the station's government, its security, its very soul. They proved a fundamental truth. Technology, which had been used as a tool of control and exploitation, could become a bridge. A way to connect species, to restore function, to create understanding where there had only been fear. The prosthetic leg was not just a medical device. It was an argument against hate, built from wiring and goodwill. True heroism didn't begin on a battlefield or in a control room. It started in a dark, collapsed corridor. It was born in that moment of quiet choice made in the face of expected fear. It was the decision to step forward when every instinct and every whispered warning said to step back. The monumental act of saving a station, of changing countless lives, of building a new future, hinged entirely on that one small decision, the decision to save a single person. The mechanic, who had trusted only machines, became a guardian. He learned that the most complex system he would ever repair was not made of metal and wire. It was made of people, and sometimes fixing it started with a single, simple connection.